There are many different parts of the Green Tripartite Agreement that is interesting. We will be one of the first countries we will be the first country in the world that sets a CO2 tax on agriculture, for instance, as an example. The agreement entails 250,000 hectares of new forest. And those of you from especially Sweden will think, yes, and then what? For us, it means a great deal. It's an increase of 40% of our forest area. So imagine that Sweden, you would have no other country left. So it's quite a different land country we will be looking at in 2045 when this is done. 40% more forest, 250,000 hectares. And from the slides here, you will see that 150,000 of those will be on private land with wood production. So the idea is, I don't know if that will be the case, I actually have no doubts, but the idea is that 150,000 hectares of those will be on private land with production. 60,000 of those will be on private land, but set aside for biodiversity protection. So now I get questions from ministries that says, how do we establish unmanaged forests? That is sort of an odd question. But how do you not manage while planting some trees? And then there's 40,000 hectares that will be on public lands without wood production. I think it's better to say without wood production, because they would want to establish the forest quickly so that people can have a walk in the forest and enjoy that, but they will not to biomass. So why do I start here? Well, I thought it was because you are all in political organizations. I thought, maybe it could be a start jumping off point and saying, okay, how should we use those forests? You were here, I was told you were here to discuss climate and how forests can be part of that. So how should we use those? And I think there is an important point here that if you go to the next one, that has been debated for a long time. This is two different studies, you could say. One is an illustration of what's called Otto's hypothesis. Otto's hypothesis was published in Science in 1969, I think, 67. And the hypothesis is that you could also name it differently, say that the hypothesis is that trees do not grow into the heavens. There is an upper limit as to how much trees can grow and how much biomass that can be accumulated. So that could be what you are looking at here is Otto's hypothesis in workings, that it seems that there can't be much more biomass in here than already is. Opposite to that is a study by Lundstedt and this group in 2008, where they basically said we have killed Otto's hypothesis. We can demonstrate that the net ecosystem production down here continues into forests 300, 400, 500, 800 years of age, that they keep sequestering carbon. And that became, in the Danish political debate, became a thing that whenever you raise your hand and say, we need the wood to mitigate climate change, people say, no, just leave them because they will sequestering carbon. I don't know, how much is it? Is it 4.8 tons of carbon a year and just indefinitely? We were speculating, okay, then the ground should actually coming up because it can't be. And we started speculating. Ruge-Andersen, he is a soil specialist. A couple more. That this can't be. And then we measured Sundskov Forest for the first time in 2012. And yes, thank you. So this is the picture that we have where I talked about the part C down here. You could talk about part A here and part B that we started with. You can see here is what we have measured in the different periods. For 2012, 2013, we measured all trees, irrespective of size. We measured dead wood on transects. We measured standing dead wood. We measured all trees. Litter, we had a lot of soil samples taken across the forest. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the biomass in the above ground, that is the lighter gray color, and the below ground. I know it says minus, no, it just signals the amount that is down below ground. And you can see here that the biomass carbon pool in tons per hectare is roughly 160 something tons of carbon per hectare. But one prominent thing you can see, and remember the difference in the sampling over time, that it's completely stable. Especially the 2 last times where it's been done in the same way, they are completely stable. So, well, if there is such a continuous accumulation of carbon, at least we can say that it is not in the above ground biomass, and there is a quite stable relationship between the above and the below ground biomass because the trees need to stay anchored. So that pool does not change either. So much for our friend here, Lundstedt. If you're looking at part, the diagram here is for the individual parts, that it seems that the part A here is slightly increasing, part B is completely stable, and it has dropped somewhat out here in the wetter areas, probably because of wind throws. So there is a bit of sort of dynamics there. These graphs here show for diameter classes what happened, and that is here from 2003 to 2013. We can see that probably after the wind throw in year 2000, there was a lot of trees coming up here in this part. So you can see the biomass in these parts here increases, and then there are some trees here in the larger diameter classes that disappear, so they simply fall over and die. Now we can see that those gaps that were created up there, they are closing up, so not much is happening here in the smaller diameter classes, but those that were formed here, they sort of continue up in the bigger diameter classes, and more is falling here in the bigger diameter classes. So we can see the dynamics over time, that a wind throw, a build up, and then a drop off at a later stage in this larger diameter. So we can see this dynamics that's going on. What is interesting is that we have seen the 99 3rd of December storm that was also quite Gudrun in Sweden. That was quite severe. No, that was 2005, sorry.
No, 2005.
What was the other one? 99 was quite severe here. We have 11, we have 13. So we have these big events. They really not meant anything to the forest.
Thank you. You're very good.
We can also see what it is that's being built up in speech, because the gaps that open in the forest by the wind throw are simply not big enough for other trees to colonize. So you can see speech that accumulates in the gaps. We can see that Tvergus oaks are disappearing to a large degree. They are actually responsible for much of the disappearance. And then we can see Fraxinus, that is ash, disappearing, but we can see a build-up of the maple. So that is another part of the dynamics, and we can see the diseases happening. Okay, so we think we understand the dynamics here and why it is that it's relatively stable. Looking at some of the other pools, this is the deadwood carbon pools. It seems that there are some data from the first measurement in '93, but Jakob Heimann hasn't given them to me yet, but he's personally, yes, so that we can see if we can use those data there. So for this graph, I've only taken 2013, 2023 in inventory. So we have inventoried all the dead wood, both in 2013 and 2023. And what we can see is happening is that the amount of carbon is almost stable. It sort of levels off a bit. It seems that carbon is escaping the pool. But what we can also see is that these are the classes of how much broken down the wood is. The class 5 is almost, this is This is not. This is class 4. So class 5 is what you see up there. So it's really falling apart. And you can see that there's been more of that. It's becoming more frequent. So we actually expect to see quite a drop in the amount of dead wood in the forest here, unless of course we get a storm tomorrow, and then we start building up. But since it's been a while, the last storm that really hit here was 99. Since it's been a while, we can see that carbon is escaping out of the pool.
How do you measure carbon content in a class 4? Is that
Yeah,
7% of normal, or how do you do that?
we calibrate it, and then now Morten Christensen took out samples of these, and so we know that when it looks like this, then it has so many percent of the carbon left, because we analyze
Do you
those
know how
samples.
much it is? Can you render that by?
No,
No.
there we have simply a diminishing factor, so it's 93% for class 2 and so many percent for class 3 and so many percent for
But
it's not a very precise
No.
science that we have there, but
But class 5 has a lot less coal than class
Exactly.
1, I would say,
Yes.
even if at the same volume.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it comes, I mean, you can grab it and you can feel that it gets lighter. So there is some of the carbon that has disappeared, and that is also what fungi has been eating. Yep. Yes, and here we have the soil carbon pools. They are also completely stable. So if Lysard was absolutely right on the money, where the hell does that carbon go? And that was when we wanted to stick the knife in, because what you see here on the lower graph here are the nitrogen fluxes under this forest. Because we have one of the ICP Forest level 2 points here. I don't know if you're familiar with the ICP Forest program. It's a European program where we have intensively and less intensively monitored plots all across Europe. Well, I think we have 2 heavily monitored plots in Denmark right now. We should have a bit more. Anyway, but one of the level 2 points is just up here. So we have measured the nitrate fluxes in the groundwater here since the early 90s. And what we can see is that there is quite a high concentration of nitrate in the groundwater here. It corresponds to leaching 40 kilos of N out there in the lake every year. There is a fixed ratio between nitrogen and carbon in most living organisms that has to do with the proteins that we all develop from. So if there's a fixed ratio, and we know that the biomass, and we know that the nitrogen is leaching, that can only happen if there's no buildup of carbon. The only way that we could be leaching these amounts of nitrogen is if there's no buildup of carbon, because it would connect with nitrogen somehow, and then we would not see the seepage of the forest floor. And that was when we wrote the paper in Nature saying we were wrong. And boy, did he fight it, but we lost. So it is out there. This is the reason that when we are discussing set-aside forests, these days, at least I hear quite often, that some of the NGOs vested in this have started to say, well, we don't do that for the climate. We do it for nature, organisms, birds, frogs, I don't know what, and I think that's good. Because I'm, as a scientist, in principle, of course, I have my own feelings and my own beliefs, but as a scientist, I believe that the society going and voting at the next election should be the ones deciding. And if we have the facts right, then people have a better chance of making the right choice. So I think it's actually a milestone that they recognize, okay, it's not a climate fix to have this set aside for it. What it is maybe something very good for a special fungus. And that is perfectly okay, it's a perfectly good argument. You just need to have the arguments right. And at least coming from my point of view in my part of the world, that is what I want. We need the facts right. Then people can make the decisions as to what they want. But they need to be more informed than that. But I think now we'll just talk a bit more so that now we can listen to me. But yeah, question. Yes, of course.
Sorry, I understood your speech right. That, well,
you are binding any more carbon in this, and because of that, the nitrogen is leaking out to the waterways.
Yes.
If I think about another argument, you have to leave a broad amount of forest to waterways to protect from nutrient leakage. So in that case, it means you shouldn't leave old forest. If I want to popularize and draw the conclusions of this, you shouldn't leave old forest next to a waterway because it won't bind up the nitrogen. You should leave the young forest.
And thank you very much for that question, because it's a really, really good question. Because this Green Tripartite Agreement had two main foci. One was climate, and one was retention of nutrients from agriculture. Those were the two main things originally. Then weights have been shifted and so on. Then there were three parts underneath. One was biodiversity protection or habitat conservation. One was drinking water protection, and one was recreation. So let's see how it goes with the nutrient retention. Of course, for this afforestation for the first 100 years, you probably will be in the right.
Yeah.
Unless if you allow the forest to establish itself, because then that takes time and you could be leaching nitrogen anymore. So it will be doing well for the first 100 years. Biodiversity, but then you're right. Then it will be, and forest is a really big, good filter. It filters nitrogen out of the air, drops down here, not taken up by any metabolism or anything, straight into the waterway. Also straight into the drinking water reserve. So you might also not be protecting the drinking water. I think it's such a good point. And it's not because I think we should have these things. My personal belief now, outside science, is that we should not have too much of it. But that's a personal belief of mine. Because I think the forest can do so much more. Because if you have the forest and you actually extract the biomass, what you also extract is the nitrogen, allowing to build up more, to take up more nitrogen. So in that way, you're saving you're not only making a product that could be saving climate, but you're also saving your drinking water and your coastal waters. So first I've tried to depict the unmanaged forest here. They have them trees, they go larger, and they go larger, which means that the uptake just goes down, but then it levels off at a specific point, right? So then there's no more uptake. So it doesn't go further down here. So that is why this curve is drawn the way that it is, that is stated. Then we have a different situation in a managed forest. You have some trees, they start growing larger, they start following the same trend as the unmanaged curve, but here the trees all of a sudden get smaller. It's because it's not the same trees, they have been harvested. So we planted some new trees. So you have quite a large emission, right? You have emissions, so you have something more out in the atmosphere. Then you establish some new trees in all of the Nordic countries. There are legislation in place that make you do this. And that legislation, speaking for Denmark, is one of the strongest legislations that we have. We can be absolutely sure that there will be new trees. So, but the trees grow slow in the beginning. So that is why this curve here starts slowly, but then the trees start catching on, and they grow faster when they're sort of young and middle aged. It's the same thing with my kids. And at some point it levels off again. But of course you have all this out in the atmosphere, so it's above it gets close to the unmanaged line at some point in time. But it's not all of this that was out in the atmosphere, was it? Because some of it was placed, some of the carbon was placed in a chair, in a house, in a whatever project you could have. So the curve does not go all the way up there. It actually stops here because some of it was not emitted into the atmosphere. Some of this carbon was in paper. Well, then it doesn't stay out of the circuit for a long time, right? But some of it is in your house, and we know that you're a careful painter of the woodwork, so that will stay there forever, right? Mm-hmm. But quite a lot of it is emitted. So these two curves come closer to each other. But something remains there, if not indefinitely, then at least for a long time. Also, compared to the unmanaged scenario, we save some other emissions because we save some fossil fuel emissions because some of this went to wood chips. In some cases, it's much. When I cut down a big beech tree like what you have there, or I don't, but him it does, and he cuts it down, he puts the cut up there somewhere, he will probably cut off around 45–50% of it will be the bulb, but the remainder will not have as much usage, and some of it goes to firewood. If it's a conifer trees, we are just having some very old, very big conifers right now. Around 75–77% of it will become something that is useful. But it depends on the tree species, how much of the lessened fossil emissions you have. And then also you have some lessened emissions from materials, because some of this will be put into our house. And when we did do that, we did not put a steel beam in there or a concrete beam. Your chair is not made from steel or aluminum or whatever you could make it from otherwise. You also have some lessened emissions from materials compared to the unmanaged scenario. We are all the time comparing to the unmanaged scenario. Which means that at some point here, the curve goes lower than the unmanaged curve. This is what's called the carbon depth, is something you hear in the media all the time. This is the carbon payback time. How much time did it take to pay back the carbon that you originally emitted? We did some studies on how long is that payback time actually here in Denmark. Based on a very large, we had more than 67% or something of all the energy going to power stations. We had tracks on where did all the wood come from that was imported to as biomass. The carbon payback time for the current energy mix in Denmark, the current use of the wood for materials and blah blah blah, all that what we've seen here, is around 5 years. If it's Danish sourced wood, it's around 1 year. So whenever people say, if you cut down that tree, it will only be repaid carbon-wise in 200 years. No, because you're not sourcing individual trees. You're sourcing from areas and the size of Denmark actually. You're sourcing from regions. So could we quit that discussion about that tree? Because elsewhere...
Could we invite you to have this debate with the Finnish professors?
I will happily have that debate with anyone.
Good.
Because, of course, down here we didn't cut the trees, so they are, of course, growing, capturing some of that carbon. Look, please. So, yeah, we'll skip that example. It's quite complicated, but we actually sort of simulated some harvest in some real forest where we have mapped every tree and their biomass, and that shows roughly the same, other than it's actually a benefit to harvest the trees almost immediately in many of the things. But where are we going in the future? And these will be my final remarks. I think there are some more slides, but I think we'll leave it to that. Firstly, we need to increase tree growth so that the steepness of this curve becomes bigger. When we're talking about climate, now I'm not talking about insects, fungi, birds, whatever. Forests have always been taking care of multiple things. But now we'll just talk about what we should do for the climate. We should have the trees growing faster. That is selecting the right provenances, but also looking into a changing climate. We need tree species that can actually tolerate that climate. So maybe we'll see Castanea sativa here in 100 years from now, or you'll be planting it, or hybrid walnut is the tip. We need to increase wood use, going from the upper curve to the yellow curve, the bright purple curve down here, because then we store more wood out in the built environment, especially. But what about the fossil part? Fossil energy replacement. It's been a huge debate in Denmark, and I think it is in all our neighboring countries. It is at an EU level. Well, in the future society, when you go to your office and look around, much, if not 90% of what you look at is coming from some sort of fossil resource, either being processed from something fossil or is simply being fossil, plastic, for instance. All of that in our common future will be replaced typically by carbon. Carbon is one of those materials that we'll be using a lot in the future, from wood, but also from straw and also other things. And I don't want to have my phone or my laptop or my car even for more than 5, 10 years. The one out there is from 2005, by the way. So there will be enough to burn. So in some ways, no, we will probably not burn as much coming directly from the forest, because we need to be much better in utilizing this beautiful resource for the future. But since that our society is turning over a lot of stuff all the time, there'll be plenty to burn. But you don't see any, and you really don't see any wood-fired or biomass-fired big plants in Denmark being built these days. It's all garbage incineries, where they are taking the energy and using it for making power and heating for housing. I think that's what we'll see in the future. So, no, perhaps not directly from the forest, but via pathways. And then we need to be much better to substitute the materials that our societies are built on from forests than we are today. Because cutting that and removing 55% of the volume in the first, then it goes to the wood, the sawmill. Well, their efficiency is around 55%. Then it goes for whatever it is to be a piece of furniture. And you're very quickly down to, for the broadleaves, 15% of the biomass ends up in the final product. For the conifers, it's perhaps 25%, but still there's too much material. I think that is where our research needs to be, other than, of course, the research in forest still, but much of our effort must go into material science. How do we use these products? Okay. I think that is that's what we take home, is how can we support our industries? And that actually pinpoints it here. That is the wood flow for Denmark from 2018. You can see the little resource here. We have a lot of imports of biomass for fueling. And you can see this wood stream here and how much of it actually ends up in energy. It's so little that ends out in the final product. And I'm just asking, is that a problem? Or it's a big opportunity in the end? It's a big, I think it is a really big opportunity.
What's that?
That we can use it.
Instead of burning it, you can use more different kinds of things.
We could dissolve it into
Exactly.
fibers or molecules and rebuild them into something else.
Yeah.
BECCS or carbon capture and storage is also here. That's another usage. But I think actually our society will be, if we go back from harvesting the carbon from underground, our carbon will be a valuable product, because down here it's concentrated. In coal, it's completely concentrated, almost nothing else. In oil, is less so. Gas, but we will be lacking carbon in our society. So carbon will be a quite pricey commodity. This is being worded in a different way in the Danish debate. Why should we use the forest? Because you're only utilizing such a small part of it. You could say the same thing about wheat, right? How much flour do you think actually comes out of this plant? Yeah, it's 12%. It's the same thing as conifers. So 50%, something like that. So I mean, it's a stupid argument, but it is a challenge. How can we do that? Yes. Now it's your fault that we will not get back to the bus in time. Just say that. I can stay here. No worries.
I agree with you, being able to make other products and have longer value chains before you eventually put it into the oven and use it for energy. But one of the problems that we may be facing in Denmark is that we don't get the industries that they will probably get to far larger extent in Sweden and in Finland and in Norway, countries where they have far larger forest and wood industries. So in that respect, because my perspective is that even if we don't get that in Denmark, it's still perfectly acceptable to use wood directly for energy consumption because it entails so many other great things in connection to forest and forestry, and it actually put a lot of economy into the forest sector. As far as we can tell, we were discussing it a bit earlier today that over the past 15 years where we've been using biomass for energy, forest area has increased, amount of wood in the forest, the standing wood, the dead wood has increased, amount of wood taken out for products has increased. So in that respect, not that there is a direct causality, but it still shows that the key figures are going in the right direction.
I'd say that from the forest statistics, all key figures, all the indicators under the 6 criteria of the Pan-European criteria for sustainable forest management are going up, so to speak. Or
First of all, welcome to this project. It is a project that a company called the Coffee Collective has made. They have coffee restaurants in Copenhagen. They have also in Aarhus. I think they have 7 or 8 coffee restaurants. They established their own business in 2007. And one of their goals was to pay the farmer who produces the coffee a little more, so that you can say that here in the rich countries we drink the coffee, and in the poor countries they make the coffee beans. So they pay a little extra to the farmers for the coffee beans, and that's a way to make it better for them. So that's their mindset in all of this. So they take some, you can say, responsibility in the work we're in. And that's the same with this project. So they want to create something that is good for the climate and it's good for biodiversity.
Started in 2023. The people behind Coffee Collective. Collective Forest is a fredskov, protected forest, which in the most natural way should contribute to reduce our climate aftryk. Impact, climate impact,
It's nice. It's nice.
Yeah.
Some of the forest was the bit that we walked through early on. And then they have 5 hectares here behind. And I think they have maybe a summer party. They put up tents and they have a lot of fun here, I think. Yeah. I was just asking about the economy project like this. The cost of the land was 170,000 kroner back in 2022. The subsidy from the old scheme was 35,000 kroner. The cost of doing this planting, setting fence, the weed maintenance is about 60,000 kroner. And the land, because you have planted, what?
Total or per hectare?
Per hectare. 60,000 kroner per hectare. Subsidy 35,000 per hectare. You bought the land 170,000 kroner. The instant you planted the land, it went down to maybe 120,000 kroner, I think. So, yeah, it's a little bit tough being a company that wants to plant a forest here, and that will go really a long time before you have any income for this, especially because it's broadleaf and it will be a low income in many years. We are now getting, as you probably know, a better subsidy scheme, and that will increase the numbers of hectares that will be planted. But as I see it, one of the big issues is the income for the landowner every year. Because it's okay you get a high subsidy when you are planting, you use most of it when you are making the forest the first couple of years. But if you then go down to 2,000 kroners from the EU subsidy, and that's all you get, not many people will do it. You need to get a higher income every year that is similar to what you get when you are growing grain. So there could be different solutions to that. One of the things that would be maybe easy to do is the credits, carbon credits, or credits in another way. As I understand, it's not a possibility at the moment because of the ones that are issuing those credits don't see the potential right now in Denmark.
And also because of the problem of additionality in relation to the green tripartite agreement, because if you want to have carbon dioxide credits when you plant forests, you need to be able to establish that the carbon sequestration will be permanent. By having a protected forest, it will certainly be permanent, but you also need to prove additionality. You need to prove that this would not have happened unless you do it. But when the government launches a program saying we will plant 250, or we will ensure that 250,000 hectares of forest is planted, and they give a higher grant than the EU grant is, then it's very hard to prove that you are planting the 251,000 hectare of forest. So there's a problem with additionality, which means that most companies, being very scared of being accused of greenwashing, they would prefer to do such initiatives in Kenya or other countries where they don't have a green tripartite agreement.
Yeah.
Peter, could you tell us a little about if you have a climate focus on what tree species you chose, and which discussions did you have, for instance, for leaving out the 20% conifers or something like that?
Well,
could you tell a little about how you've done that?
Yeah. The subsidy for broadleaves was at the time the double size than if it was conifers. So that meant something also for this company. But you're allowed to, if you plant the broadleaves, to have you can make some small round, what do you call it, holme, small areas with conifers. That's allowed, but it's in this area it's in total 2 hectares that are conifers, but they are placed in very small groups, because that's the way we could get the subsidy for broadleaves. And the broadleaves that are planted are mostly the broadleaves that have a higher, what do you call it? They are skyggetræer.
Climax tree species.
Climax tree species. Beech, Prunus avium. It's Acer pseudoplatanus, those kind of species that is mostly used to increase carbon.
But still, you wanted to make a forest that was resilient to the challenges of the future.
Yeah.
And now we have a double challenge.
because it's beginning to be allowed to talk about the collapse of the AMOC, and that will make a colder climate, and we have been threatened with a warmer climate. Until 3 years ago, the University of Copenhagen, which is behind our education, was researching about the future oak species to use in Denmark. And they were focusing on American oak, French oak, oak that was used to heat and drought. And we have that out there. But we also have the conifers. Should the AMOC collapse? It's seriously, it is the conifers that will survive and be the strongest. So, riding 2 horses.
And almost on the top of the hill. There are some protections out here, so we could not place it on the real top, but a little below. But you have to understand, when you are looking at architecture at this time, especially the power architecture, this is something about political power, but also about religious power. And as you perhaps have noticed, when you came on the highway in your Viking bus, you saw the big brown signs on the side of the highway where it stands National Park Skjoldenes land of the Scyldings. And the Scyldings is, according to legendary tales and written sources, the first royal dynasty in Denmark. And after all these great halls have been excavated, about 9 of them, this is the biggest. They start from the middle of the 500 after Christ up to around 1000. You can see that there's a kind of truth in these old tales and legends, because there's a dynasty here for 500 years. So there must be something about the legends about the royal lineage of the Scyldings, like in Sweden. I know we have some Swedes here. You have your Ynglinge royal lineage over there, and it's also the same in Norway. Actually, Ynglinge and Norway are connected at that part. So. And you know also from this tales, exactly from the Icelandic writer Snorri Sturluson, where have you ever Iceland? Yeah, we are very fond of Snorri. Oh, yep. Because he writes a lot about Nordic mythology. He has tried to collect what he has been hearing in older written sources. He also tells us actually that King Shield, or Kong Skjold in Danish, he marries a goddess called Heidon. That is the one who steals a lot of land from the Swedes by plowing, another myth. And they settle here at Lejre or Lettre, as it calls. And this is why the castle still is called Letreborg Castle. And we also know, Snorri also tells us that King Shield is not an ordinary son of a normal man. He's actually son of the greatest of the gods, and that's Odin, the warrior god, the god of poetry, the god of the hand, and he's the all-knowing God. And every king, ever since, you know from the legendary tales, and also in England, after they've been Christian, they put the lineage back to Odin, actually. Because, you know, in a lot of cultures, when you have to, fight for your power, or it is legal, it's very good to be of a good family. The best family you could stem from is actually the lineage of the gods. We know that also in Greek mythology and all this stuff. So you have to understand that the guy who ordered this hall to be built has been looked by his followers like an intermediate between the gods and the earthen people here. And this is also exactly interesting when you're talking about wood and architecture, because in the Northern mythology you have a very famous tree. It's ash, the ash Yggdrasil. The name Ygg is also one of the 200 bynames for Odin. That means the terrible one. And Drasil means horse. And we know when you have what you call shamanistic traditions in your religions, some very special people have this ability to travel between worlds, and they normally do that on a horse. And we know
How many legs have Odin's horse?
8.
8 legs. Yeah. So it can go faster than any horse and actually can ride to different worlds. And you also know that if you want to enter the knowledge sphere, you know, in Mongolia, even today in Siberia, the shamans have to climb high up in a tree, both when they are initiated in different ceremonies, even today. It's still a living tradition, but you also have, you're closer to the, what we call it, the garden sphere, you're higher up you can get. This is why this is placed high, but this is also why a tree is a very important symbol. So, are you all working with forests? Look at your ash trees if you have any. Different point of view, perhaps this is a very sacred tree.
And spiritual. So that's the way we use Hlynur. And it's from the age where the planted at the time where the British army took our ships in the Portin's war in 1805.